The morning Claire Donovan was fired, the sky over Manhattan was the color of an old bruise, deep purple bleeding into gray at the edges, the kind of sky that made people walk faster and keep their eyes down. She noticed it from the window of the 32nd floor of Harwick and Lane Financial Group, pressing her fingertips lightly against the cold glass, the way she always did when she needed to think. Below her, yellow cabs threaded through the avenues like needles through fabric, and the city hummed its usual indifferent song. She had been watching that same view for 3 years. She had loved it once. "Claire." The voice came from behind her, clipped and deliberate. "Mr. Harwick would like to see you in his office now." She turned. Sandra Meeks, Senior Director of Operations, stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and that particular expression on her face, the one that Claire had privately nicknamed the verdict. Sandra was 47, impeccably dressed, and had a talent for making people feel small without ever raising her voice. She was wearing it like a weapon this morning. "Of course," Claire said, smoothing the front of her beige sweater and reaching down to collect a thin folder from the corner of her desk. She had prepared that folder 2 weeks ago. It contained a full restructuring proposal for the company's mid-tier client portfolio, 86 pages annotated, with projected revenue impact for the next 18 months. She had stayed late for 11 consecutive nights to build it. Sandra's eyes dropped to the folder, then back up. She said nothing. The walk through the open office felt longer than it had any right to. Claire passed rows of glass-walled meeting rooms and open desks where colleagues typed without looking up. Marcus Webb from accounting caught her eye for exactly half a second before dropping his gaze to his keyboard. Priya Nair, who had eaten lunch with Claire every Thursday for 2 years, suddenly became very interested in the document on her screen. The silence was different from the usual Tuesday morning quiet. It had a texture to it. Everyone already knew. That was the first thing that made her stomach drop. The second was the man sitting in the corner of Thomas Harwick's office. She had never seen him before. He was maybe 35, dressed in dark slacks and a plain white shirt with no tie, which was unusual for this floor. Harwick demanded jackets at minimum. The man was lean, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the temples, and the kind of jaw that looked like it had been drawn by someone who took their time. He sat with one ankle resting on the opposite knee, a disposable coffee cup balanced on his thigh, watching the window with the relaxed attention of someone who was very used to waiting and very rarely bored by it. He wore no badge, no visitor lanyard. He didn't look like a client. She almost didn't notice Thomas Harwick himself sitting behind the desk. Claire. Harwick was 61, silver-haired, with the careful warmth of a man who had spent decades learning exactly how much friendliness was necessary and how little sincerity was required to go with it. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Sit down, please." She sat. The stranger in the corner didn't move or introduce himself. He just continued looking at the window. "We've been doing some evaluation," Harwick began, "of team performance and departmental allocation. As you know, this quarter has been challenging," Sandra finished from behind Claire. She had followed her in. She was standing by the door. "Yes, challenging." Harwick cleared his throat. "And in that context, we've made some difficult decisions regarding the junior analyst development track." Claire set the folder on the edge of the desk. "I actually prepared something that I think could help with the quarter. I've been working on a restructuring proposal for the Tier B client segment. If you look at the projected retention rate alone, it should—" "We're letting you go, Claire." The words landed without ceremony. She heard Sandra shift her weight behind her. "I see," Claire said. She was surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. Inside, something had gone very quiet. Not numb exactly, but compressed, like the moment before a match is struck. "This is a performance-based decision," Sandra said from the doorway. "We'll need your badge and your access card before you leave. HR has your severance paperwork ready at the front desk." Claire looked at the folder still sitting on the corner of Harwick's desk. He hadn't touched it. He hadn't even glanced at it. She stood slowly, picked the folder back up and held it against her chest. 3 years, she said quietly. 86 pages. 11 nights. Harwick looked mildly uncomfortable. "We appreciate your dedication, Claire, truly." She turned to leave. At the door, she stopped. not because she had anything more to say to Harwick or Sandra, but because the man in the corner had finally moved. He had turned slightly in his chair, and for the first time he was looking directly at her. His eyes were dark, not cold, but very still, the way deep water is still. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately name. Not pity, not curiosity. Something quieter than both. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she walked out. She didn't cry at her desk. She packed her personal items into a canvas tote, a small succulent named Gerald, a framed photo from a family vacation in Vermont, a coffee mug with a chipped handle that she'd kept meaning to replace for a year. She did it methodically, without theater, while Sandra hovered 3 desks away pretending to review something on a tablet. Marcus walked past. Didn't speak. Priya walked past. Didn't speak. A new intern whose name Claire didn't know stared openly from across the room until another intern elbowed him. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor, and Claire walked out into the lobby, canvas tote over one shoulder, 86-page restructuring proposal under her arm, and the bruise-colored Manhattan morning waiting beyond the revolving glass doors. She stood on the sidewalk. The city moved around her in every direction, fast, loud, completely uninterested. A woman in heels stepped around her without breaking stride. A delivery cyclist rang a bell. Someone's coffee cart radio was playing a country song that didn't belong in this zip code. Claire looked up at the 32nd floor of the Harwick and Lane building, found the window she had stood at an hour ago, and watched it for a long moment. Then she turned and started walking. She didn't know that the man with the dark eyes and the disposable coffee cup was still sitting in Thomas Harwick's office. She didn't know that he had asked, very calmly, very quietly, to see her personnel file after she left. She didn't know that he had picked up her proposal from the corner of the desk where Harwick had left it untouched, and was now reading it with the focused attention of someone who understood exactly what they were looking at. And she absolutely did not know his name. She would, soon enough. The name on the lease of the apartment on the 38th floor of a building 6 blocks north of Harwick and Lane was Nathan Cole. Not Nathan Cole Weston, just Nathan Cole. The Weston part he had dropped deliberately 3 weeks ago. The same morning he'd asked his assistant Derek to book him a 1-bedroom in Midtown under a simplified name, cancel his usual car service, and tell absolutely no one where he was staying or what he was doing. Derek had looked at him the way a man looks at someone he's worked for long enough to know better than to question. "How long?" Derek had asked. "As long as it takes," Nathan had said. That had been 22 days ago. In those 22 days, Nathan Cole Weston, founder and majority shareholder of Weston Capital Group, a private equity firm with holdings across 11 industries and a portfolio valued at somewhere north of $4 billion, had visited 9 companies. He had worn plain clothes, introduced himself simply as Nathan Cole, described himself as a financial consultant doing independent market research, and had been allowed into boardrooms, staff meetings, and executive briefings in every single case. Not one person had recognized him. Not one person had looked past the ordinary name and the absence of a tailored suit to ask the right questions. That, in itself, told him everything he needed to know about how those companies were run. Harwick and Lane had been the 9th stop. He had been invited in by Thomas Harwick himself, who believed Nathan was a potential client, referred by a mutual contact, which was technically true, though the referral had been arranged deliberately, and the purpose of the visit had nothing to do with becoming a client. Weston Capital Group had been quietly acquiring a minority stake in Harwick and Lane for 7 months. The acquisition was almost complete. What Nathan had needed, before he finalized anything, was to understand what he was actually buying, not the numbers. He had analysts for the numbers. He wanted to understand the culture, the instincts, the quality of the people inside. He had his answer now. He had watched Sandra Meeks manage that termination with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it many times and felt nothing each time. He had watched Thomas Harwick deliver the news with the smooth, hollow warmth of a man who had long since confused comfort with honesty. He had watched an entire open-plan office full of people pretend not to see a colleague of 3 years pack her things into a canvas tote, while a succulent and a chipped coffee mug bore witness. And then he had picked up the folder from the corner of the desk. He read it cover to cover in 40 minutes, sitting in Harwick's office while the older man made polite, nervous small talk that Nathan barely registered. The proposal was, and he was not someone who used this word loosely, exceptional. Not in presentation. The formatting was clean but modest, the kind a person produces when they have no support staff and limited resources. What was exceptional was the thinking underneath it. The analysis of client retention patterns across the Tier B segment was sharper than anything his own team had produced on similar data. The revenue projections were conservative, clearly flagged as such, and supported by 3 separate methodological approaches. She had even included a risk mitigation section that accounted for market variables Nathan's own analysts had overlooked in their last quarterly review. He read it twice. Then he asked Harwick for Claire Donovan's personnel file. Harwick had hesitated, just briefly, before sliding a tablet across the desk. Nathan read quietly. 3 years at the firm. Consistently rated, meets expectations on annual reviews, the corporate equivalent of being invisible. One note from 18 months ago, written by Sandra Meeks, described her as competent but lacking executive presence. There had been no promotion. No raise beyond the standard annual adjustment. She had been assigned to the junior analyst track and had apparently stayed there unacknowledged while producing work that outclassed people 2 levels above her. Nathan handed the tablet back without comment. He flew back to his real apartment that evening, the penthouse on the Upper West Side, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the Hudson that he rarely had time to look at, and sat for a while in the half-dark, the city spreading gold and silver below him. He was not a sentimental man. He had not built $4 billion in assets by making decisions based on gut feelings or sympathy. But something about those 86 pages would not sit quietly in his mind. He called Derek at 7 in the morning. "I need a current address for a former Harwick and Lane employee, Claire Donovan, junior analyst, terminated yesterday." A pause. "And the purpose?" "I want to offer her a position." Another pause, slightly longer. "At which firm?" "Ours." He heard Derek typing. "I'll have it within the hour." Nathan set the phone down and stood at the window. Below, the city was already in motion. Morning delivery trucks and early joggers and the first surge of commuters emerging from the subway like a tide. He thought about the moment she'd turned to leave Harwick's office, the way she'd held that folder against her chest. The 2 seconds she had looked at him before walking out, with eyes that were not angry or broken, but simply, and this was the part that stayed with him, clear, like someone who had already decided something. He hadn't been able to determine what she'd decided. That bothered him slightly. At 9:15 that same morning, Claire Donovan was sitting at a small table in a coffee shop on West 54th Street, her laptop open, a half-eaten croissant beside it, scrolling through job listings with the methodical focus of someone who had already cried exactly as much as she intended to cry about the situation, and was now done with that portion of the experience. She had allowed herself 40 minutes last night, a glass of wine, a phone call to her older sister Dana in Portland, a brief and honest sob over Gerald the succulent. Then she had made a list. She was good at lists. The coffee shop was the kind of place that had too many plants and not enough outlets, but Claire had learned which corner table had a working socket, and she had claimed it at 8:30 before the graduate students arrived. She was wearing the same beige sweater from yesterday because she hadn't felt like choosing an outfit, and her hair was pulled back in a way that was practical rather than intentional. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Manhattan area code. She almost didn't answer it. She had already fielded a call from Dana this morning, and one from her landlord about a parking space she didn't use, and she was not in the mood for anything that required patience. She answered anyway. "Claire Donovan?" The voice was male, low, measured, the kind of voice that was accustomed to being listened to without having to raise itself. "Who is this?" "My name is Nathan Cole. We were briefly in the same room yesterday morning. You don't know me." She sat very still. Her croissant went forgotten. "I know who you are," she said slowly. "You don't," he said. "But I'd like the chance to change that. I've read your proposal, Miss Donovan, all 86 pages." Silence. Her grip on the phone tightened slightly. "I took it from Harwick's desk when I left," he continued, in the same unhurried tone. "I hope you don't mind. You took my proposal." "I did, and I'd like to talk to you about it, in person if possible. Today, if you're available." She stared at the job listings still open on her laptop screen. The cursor blinked at her from inside a field that said, "Upload resume here." "Why?" she asked. There was a brief pause, not the hesitation of someone unsure of their answer, but the pause of someone choosing their words with care. "Because Thomas Harwick had that folder on the corner of his desk for 40 minutes, Nathan said, "and he never once looked at it. And I think that tells you everything you need to know about why you were let go, and everything I need to know about why I should be talking to you instead of him." The coffee shop hummed quietly around her. The espresso machine hissed. Someone's chair scraped against the floor. Claire looked at Gerald the succulent, sitting in his small pot beside her laptop, catching the thin morning light from the window. She closed the job listings tab. "Where?" she said. The address Nathan gave her was not a restaurant or a coffee shop or a hotel lobby meeting room, which was what Claire had half expected. It was an office building on Park Avenue, 40 stories of dark glass and polished granite, with a lobby that smelled like cool air and expensive stone, and the particular silence of a place where a great deal of money moves very quietly. There was no company name on the front, just the building number in brushed steel above the revolving door. She almost checked the address again. Then she walked in. The man at the front desk was expecting her. He handed her a temporary access card without being asked, told her 41st floor, and returned to his screen with the practiced neutrality of someone who had learned that the less he appeared to notice, the better he was at his job. The elevator was fast and nearly silent. Claire watched the floor numbers climb and told herself she was not nervous. She was professionally curious. There was a difference. The 41st floor opened into a reception area with no company signage, a low couch in charcoal grey, and a single assistant sitting behind a clean desk, a man in his mid-30s with close-cropped hair and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He stood when the elevator opened. "Miss Donovan, I'm Derek. Can I get you anything before I take you through?" "I'm fine, thank you." He nodded and led her past the reception area and through a set of heavy glass doors into a space that stopped her mid-step. It was not what she had pictured. The 41st floor of whatever this place was had been configured as a working office, but it didn't feel like any office she had been inside before. There were no cubicles, no corporate motivational prints on the walls, no buzzing overhead lights. Instead, a wide open space with exposed concrete ceilings and long wooden work tables, natural light flooding in from floor-to-ceiling windows that ran the length of the south wall. People worked at the tables, maybe 20 of them in quiet, focused clusters. Some were young, some were not. None of them looked up when she entered, and none of them were wearing badges. On the far end, standing at one of those windows with a coffee cup in hand, and the Manhattan skyline arranged behind him like something out of a magazine, was Nathan Cole. He turned when he heard her come in. In Harwick's office, he had been seated, background, easy to overlook if you weren't paying attention. Standing here in his own space, he was different, not louder exactly, but present in a way that the room reorganized itself around. He was taller than she'd registered. The dark eyes she remembered were the same, still and watchful, but there was something more relaxed in his posture now, as if whatever performance he had been giving yesterday had been set aside. "You came," he said. "You said you read 86 pages, Claire replied. "I figured the least I could do was show up." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, a consideration of one. He gestured toward a smaller room off to the side, glass walls, a round table, 4 chairs, a window that looked east. Derek appeared briefly to set 2 coffees on the table and then vanished with the efficiency of a man who understood that his most useful skill was timing his absence correctly. They sat across from each other. Nathan slid her proposal across the table. It was the same folder, her own printing, her own annotations in the margins, the small coffee ring on the top corner from the night she'd been working at midnight and misjudged the distance to her mug. He had added nothing to it. Not a mark, not a sticky note. But he had clearly read every page, because when he opened it to the middle, he turned directly to the section on client tier segmentation without searching. Your retention model, he said. Page 44. You account for a seasonal contraction in Q3, but you peg it at 6%. Most analysts in this segment run with 4. The trailing 3-year average for firms in Harwick's client bracket runs closer to 6.3, Claire said. I rounded conservative. He looked at her for a moment. Why didn't you round to the standard assumption? It would have made the projections look better. Because I wasn't trying to make the projections look better. I was trying to make them accurate. He nodded slowly. The way someone nods when they've asked a question they already knew the answer to and are satisfied that the answer arrived correctly. Over the next 40 minutes, he moved through the proposal with the focused precision of someone who read financial documents the way other people read novels, not scanning for the conclusion, but following the logic, testing each turn, noticing what had been left out and why. He asked 7 questions. They were not easy questions. Claire answered all 7 without hesitation, and once, on the risk waiting in the final section, she caught an error in her own reasoning out loud, before he could point to it, corrected it verbally and explained what the revised figure should be. He closed the folder. I want to offer you a position, he said. Claire wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Doing what exactly? And for whom? There's no name on this building. The pause that followed was brief, but it was the first time in the entire conversation that Nathan Cole looked like he was making a decision rather than simply executing one he'd already made. Western Capital Group, he said. I'm Nathan Weston. The name landed in the room like a stone into still water. Claire felt the ripple move through her before she could stop it. She had heard of Western Capital Group. Anyone who had spent 3 years in financial services in Manhattan had heard of Western Capital Group. You didn't always know the details, but you knew the outline. Private equity, massive portfolio, notoriously selective, notoriously private. The kind of firm that didn't advertise because it didn't need to. You were in Harwick's office as a client, she said slowly. As a prospective client. I've been acquiring a stake in Harwick and Lane for several months. Yesterday was a due diligence visit. You were evaluating them. I was evaluating their people, he said. There's a difference. She set down her coffee cup. Something cold and clear was moving through her thoughts now, the way it always did when a pattern she hadn't seen suddenly snapped into focus. And what did you conclude? She asked. Nathan held her gaze. That the most capable analyst in that building was carrying a canvas tote out the front door at 9:15 in the morning, while the people who let her go congratulated themselves on a difficult decision well made. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that 2 people sit in when something true has been said and both of them know it. What's the position? Claire asked. Portfolio strategy. You'd be working directly with my senior team on a new acquisition segment, mid-market firms in the financial services space. The work is similar to what you outlined in this proposal, but with actual resources, actual authority, and actual accountability for outcomes, and actual recognition. She hadn't planned to say that. It came out level, without bitterness, but it came out. Nathan didn't flinch. Yes, he said simply. Actual recognition. She looked at him across the table. He was not performing warmth. That was the thing she kept coming back to. He was not doing what Harwick had done, that smooth manufactured sincerity calibrated to close a room. He was just looking at her, steadily, with those quiet dark eyes and saying what he meant. I'll need to know the full terms, she said. Of course, and I'll need a few days. Take the week. She nodded. She reached across the table and picked up her proposal, tucking it back under her arm where it had been the morning before, in the hallway of a building she would never need to walk into again. She stood. He stood. Mr. Weston, she said. Nathan. She considered that for a moment. Thank you for reading it. Thank you for writing it, he said. She turned and walked back through the glass doors. Derek materialized with the elevator card. The doors closed. The lobby came. The revolving door. The Park Avenue sidewalk. The noise and sun and motion of the city in full afternoon swing. And then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. The number was one she recognized immediately, Sandra Meek's Harwick and Lane. She stared at it. It rang twice more. She let it go to voicemail. 23 seconds later, a text message arrived from the same number. Claire, call me. Something has happened. It's urgent. She stopped walking in the middle of the sidewalk. Someone stepped around her, irritated. She read the message again. Then she looked back at the building she had just left, its dark glass rising against the afternoon sky, keeping its secrets with perfect composure. Whatever had happened at Harwick and Lane in the last hour, she had a feeling she already knew who had caused it. Sandra Meeks had left 3 voicemails by the time Claire reached the corner of Park and 52nd. She listened to all 3 standing on the sidewalk, with one hand pressed over her free ear to block out the afternoon traffic, her canvas tote hanging from her shoulder, Gerald the succulent tilting slightly to the left inside it, like a small passenger unsure of the journey. The first voicemail was clipped and professional, the voice Sandra used when she wanted to sound in control of a situation that was actively escaping her. Claire, this is Sandra. Please return this call at your earliest convenience. There have been some developments this afternoon that I believe you should be aware of. The second was shorter and noticeably less composed. Claire, it's Sandra again. I need you to call me back. Today. The third was 7 seconds long. Sandra said nothing for the first 4 of them. Then, please, Claire, just call. Claire put the phone in her pocket and started walking again. She wasn't ready to call Sandra back. Not yet. Something in her chest needed to settle first. A complicated mixture of feelings she hadn't fully sorted, tangled together in ways that would take some time to unknot. Satisfaction. Discomfort. Something that felt almost like guilt, though she couldn't entirely explain what she had done to deserve it. She bought a bottle of water from a street cart, sat on the low stone ledge outside a midtown office building, and let herself think. In the 2 hours since she had left Nathan Weston's building, she had done the math. She had thought about the acquisition timeline he had described. 7 months of quietly accumulating a minority stake in Harwick and Lane. She had thought about the visit the day before, the plain clothes and the dropped surname, the careful invisibility of a man conducting a very specific kind of investigation. And she had thought about the timing. He had called her at 9:15 the morning after she was fired. He had read 86 pages overnight. Nathan Weston had not stumbled across her proposal. He had gone looking for it. The question she kept returning to was, what had he done after she left his office today? Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Marcus Webb, the same Marcus who had made eye contact for half a second yesterday morning before looking away. Hey. I don't really know how to say this, but are you okay? Things here are kind of insane right now. Then, 30 seconds later, like, actually insane. She typed back, I'm fine. What happened? His reply came in pieces, each message arriving before the previous one had fully loaded. So Harwick called her all-staff meeting an hour ago, said the firm has a new majority stakeholder effective immediately, a guy named Weston something. Nobody had heard of him except Linda from the top floor, who went completely pale. Then Harwick said there would be a full personnel review. Sandra went into her office and closed the door and hasn't come out. 3 of the senior directors are in the conference room with lawyers, and like Claire, they're going through every termination from the past 2 years. She read that last line twice. Every termination. She sat very still on the stone ledge while the city moved past her in both directions. The call she had imagined, the one she had half constructed in her mind during the elevator ride down from the 41st floor, the one where Nathan picked up his phone with the same unhurried calm he brought to everything and said simply, fire every one of them, had apparently been something considerably more surgical than that. He hadn't burned the building down. He had walked in through the front door in broad daylight with lawyers and a controlling stake in hand, and he had begun the quiet, methodical process of making things right. She thought about those 7 questions he had asked her during the meeting. She thought about the way he had turned to page 44 without searching. She thought about the first time she had seen him, sitting in the corner of Harwick's office with a coffee cup on his knee and his eyes on the window, looking like a man with nothing particular to do and nowhere particular to be, while actually being the only person in the room who understood exactly what was happening and exactly where it would lead. She almost smiled. Almost. Her phone rang. Not Sandra this time. not Marcus. The same number she had saved in her contacts 40 minutes ago, under the name she was still getting used to. She answered. "You've had some time to think," Nathan said. "I've had some time to receive text messages," she replied. "Marcus Webb says your lawyers arrived at Harwick and Lane approximately 40 minutes ago." A brief pause. "They did. You didn't mention that this morning." "No," he agreed. "I didn't." She watched a couple walk past her, arguing amiably about where to have dinner, completely unaware of anything except each other and the question of whether the Thai place on Lexington was worth the wait. The city had a way of making everything else feel very large and very small at the same time. "Why not?" she asked. "Because it wasn't relevant to the offer I was making you," Nathan said. "The two things are separate. The acquisition was already in motion. Your position at Western Capital is based on your work. I didn't want you to confuse the two, and I didn't want you to accept the offer for the wrong reasons." She thought about that. It was, she had to admit, a very specific kind of integrity, the kind that was easy to miss unless you were looking for it. "Sandra called me 3 times, she said. "I know." "What did your review find?" Another pause. This one felt different, more deliberate. 18 months ago, he said, your direct supervisor submitted a performance note describing you as lacking executive presence. 6 weeks after that note was filed, a project you had substantially authored was presented to a mid-tier client under a different analyst's name. You weren't credited. The client renewed their contract specifically citing the quality of the analysis. The stone ledge was very cold through the fabric of her trousers. She hadn't realized it until this moment. "I didn't know about the client renewal," she said. "No," Nathan said. "You weren't told." The silence that followed was long enough that a city bus went past, loud enough to erase everything and then quiet enough for the city to reassemble itself around her. "I'm going to ask you something," she said finally. "All right. The offer this morning, the position at Western Capital, is it real, fully independent of all of this?" "Yes. You would have offered it to me regardless of what your lawyers found today." "I offered it to you before my lawyers arrived at Harwick and Lane," he said. "In that order, yes." She exhaled slowly. Gerald the succulent had righted himself inside the tote, she noticed. Small mercies. "Then I accept," she said. There was a moment, brief but present, in which Nathan Weston did not say anything. And in that brief silence, for the first time, Claire heard something in him that was not measured or strategic or unhurried, something that was simply quiet and human and unexpectedly warm. "Good," he said. And then, in a tone she hadn't heard from him yet, "I'm glad." She started walking again, heading west, no destination yet in mind, letting the city carry her. They talked for another 20 minutes, not about the position or the acquisition or the lawyers now working their way through Harwick and Lane's personnel files floor by floor. They talked about the 86 pages, about the specific methodology she had used for the risk-weighting section, and about a market pattern he had noticed 6 months ago that aligned with something she had outlined in the appendix, and about the fact that she had flagged a coming contraction in the Tier B segment that his own team had missed, and that was now playing out almost exactly as she had predicted. He asked her how she had seen it. She told him. He listened in a way that made it clear he was actually listening, not waiting for his turn to speak. By the time she reached Central Park, the conversation had shifted, the way conversations sometimes do when the professional scaffolding relaxes and something more natural takes its place. He mentioned that he had not slept particularly well. She told him she hadn't either. He asked about Gerald the succulent. She had apparently mentioned the name in passing, and he had filed it away because he asked about it by name, which made her laugh for the first time since yesterday morning. It was not a polished laugh. It surprised her slightly. "Start Monday," as he said as she reached the low stone wall at the park's edge. "Derek will have everything ready. And Claire?" "Yes?" "Bring Gerald," he said. "We have good light on the 41st floor." She stood at the edge of the park as the late afternoon turned the sky warm above Manhattan, all amber and rose gold, the buildings catching it and throwing it back in long flashes across the stone and glass. Nothing like the bruise-colored morning she had started in, everything somehow entirely different. She thought about the window on the 32nd floor of Harwick and Lane, the one she had pressed her fingertips against that morning, watching the city below and feeling in a way she hadn't been able to name at the time, that something was about to change. She had been right. She just hadn't known which direction. The city moved on around her, loud and indifferent and magnificent. And Claire Donovan, with a succulent under her arm and an 86-page proposal that had finally been read by someone who deserved to read it, looked up at the amber sky over Manhattan and decided that being fired was, in the end, the best thing that had ever happened to her. She turned toward home. Behind her, the park rustled in the early evening breeze, and somewhere on the 41st floor of a building with no name on the front, a man with dark, still eyes stood at a south-facing window and watched the same sky. Neither of them knew yet exactly where this was going. But for the first time in a long time, both of them wanted to find out.